All right. Good morning, guys. Those of you that are here, we're gonna try out this live lecture. I'll be back. Get started right at 8:15. As you guys see, when you hop into the live lecture, go ahead and type your name in the live chat. That way, I know that you're here. I will be right back. I'm gonna go ahead and get some stuff and get ready. All right. Be back. All right, guys. Happy Tuesday morning. Trying to kind of do a couple of things at the same time with watching YouTube while also trying to do the live lecture. So bear with me. It's a learning experience. I've never done this by myself. So ultimately, what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be going through some PowerPoint slides, kind of doing our introduction, and then starting to really talk about photosynthesis. It's not going to be perfect, so you're not, well, you should be able to see most of it, but as you can see probably on your screen, there's like this little bright spot right here in the middle. It shouldn't make too much of a difference with being able to see everything, but I can kind of see the screen as I'm talking, so I will try to point out the things that may be blurred by that. So what the idea is, I'll kind of go through the slides, I'll do my thing. In the live chat, if you have a question or if you need some clarification or you want me to kind of go over something a little bit more, type a question into the live chat, and then I can see it over here on my my iPad screen. So I can see when you put a question in there, and I can kind of slow down and go back and talk a little bit about something a little bit more or whatever it might be. Okay, so let's kind of dive right into it. Happy Tuesday. Hopefully the first day of NTI yesterday went pretty well. It was an even day, so if you had an even class, well, you did have even classes, but if you had something to work on, hopefully it wasn't too much or too bad, and you were able to take care of what you needed to take care of. So today we're going to kind of jump right into it. If you remember, before we left for Thanksgiving break, we were talking about chemical reactions and energy, and then we were kind of starting the process or laying the foundation to get ready to talk about photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So today we're going to dive into photosynthesis. Like I said, I'm going to move at a somewhat steady pace so that we're not on here forever and ever and ever. If you need me to slow down, if you have some questions, go ahead and put those in the live chat and we'll go from there. All right, so let's start talking about photosynthesis. If you remember, let's take a quick little step back and think a little bit about where we've been. So we talked basically about two different types of reactions. We talked about endergonic, all right, storing energy in chemical bonds within molecules, right? Endergonic reactions. Another name for that is anabolic and non-spontaneous, okay? So that's what we're going to be talking about with photosynthesis, storing energy from the sun using some other materials in chemical bonds that can then be used later on to do something. So we have endergonic, anabolic, non-spontaneous. On the flip side of that, we have exergonic, catabolic, and spontaneous, which is going to be cellular respiration that we're going to talk about a little bit later. All right, the two PowerPoints that I'm going to be using are posted in our Schoology materials in our bioenergetics unit folder. I'm going to start with photosynthesis day 1, which is kind of an overview, and then hopefully we'll have some time to get into the one that's called electron flow. Okay, so here we go. Let's go ahead and dive into it. Let me know if you have any questions, and we'll go from there. All right, so here we go. Photosynthesis. These first couple slides I'm going to go kind of quickly because it's just images, examples of things that go through photosynthesis. Obviously, when we think about photosynthesis, we're talking about autotrophic organisms, right? Organisms that have the ability to make their own food, right? So they gain access to energy, in this case, via a structure in their cells, chloroplasts, and they take that energy, light energy, they mix it with some other molecules, which we're going to look at here in just a second, and they create their own energy. They create their own food, right? They have to send that food somewhere else. So a common misconception, and I don't know if you guys have it, but a lot of the younger students that we see have it, is that plants do photosynthesis and animals do cellular respiration. Okay? The idea with that is autotrophic organisms that have chloroplasts, they do photosynthesis. For the most part, that's plants. Okay? Algae, phytoplankton, single-celled organisms that are actually, some of them are animal cells, but they're like a link between plants and animals. So they're animal cells, but they also have chloroplasts so they can create their own energy and do photosynthesis, right? So we have plants, we have algae, we have phytoplankton, but we do have some bacteria, right, that do photosynthesis as well. So they don't have a mitochondria, so they are going to create these molecules that they need for energy, and they're going to do something with them to break them down to get that energy, okay? So the common misconception is that only plant-like organisms do photosynthesis and only animal-like organisms do cellular respiration, when really anything with a chloroplast can do photosynthesis or something very similar to photosynthesis, and anything with a mitochondria can do cellular respiration. So remember back to when we talked about cell organelles, plant cells have both chloroplasts and mitochondria. So they have the ability to make their own sugar, make their own food, but then send it directly to the mitochondria to turn it into ATP or energy. Our cells, animal cells, we got to get that food, that energy from somewhere else, send it to our mitochondria so that we can make energy, okay? So it's a common misconception that plants do photosynthesis and animals do cellular respiration, when in actuality, anything with a chloroplast does photosynthesis, anything with a mitochondria then does cellular respiration. And there's some carryover there between those different organisms. All right? Obviously, there's our heterotrophic animals. we have to get energy from somewhere else. All right. Also, so sorry to kind of jump to the side here for a second. If the sound is not right, like if you're struggling to see something or just something goes wrong with my feed to YouTube Live, put a comment down there in the live chat so that I can see that and try to fix that as quickly as possible so that you guys have a good experience with seeing this stuff. Okay, so here we go. And then we have heterotrophic funguses that decompose materials. They get their energy that way, and then they send that to the mitochondria, and they create ATP. Okay, so chloroplasts, all right? I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this cell other than showing you that chloroplasts are located in the leaves of, in this case, plants, but if we have a single-celled organism, we're going to have chloroplasts in that single-celled organism. But chloroplasts are located in what's called the mesophyll, which is made up of these mesophyll cells. So these are specialized cells in plants that are just chock full of chloroplasts. Okay? If we look at the chloroplast, here's what we need to know. Okay? If we look at the chloroplast, there is something that we should notice right away. There is an outer membrane, okay? So it's basically a sac, an organelle, so it has an outer membrane. And then inside, we have all of these little sandwiched sacs, smaller sacs or structures that are surrounded by an inner membrane, okay? So what I want you to think about really quickly is we have the outer membrane, and now we have this inner membrane. Why is it important that the chloroplast has all of this extra inner membrane? Okay? Why would a chloroplast, which is where photosynthesis takes place, why would it need to have all of these kind of folds or additional sacs on the inside that are covered in membrane? What do you think? Surface area to volume ratio. Okay? There are going to be chemical reactions that are going to occur across and on the inner chloroplast membrane. Okay? So the more membrane the chloroplast has, the more chemical reactions it can do. So what happens is through evolutionary time, we have this super duper increase in surface area, right? So we have all of this inner membrane, but we keep the volume small so that we don't have too far for those materials to move. Okay, so there's another nice little connection to why surface area to volume ratio is so important in living organisms. The more surface area you have, the more membrane you have, the more reactions you can do. Okay, the smaller the volume, the less distance those materials have to move to get to where they're going. Okay, and the chloroplast is a perfect example of that. Okay, so here's just another picture of it. We have our outer membrane, and then on the inside we have all of these structures that are all surrounded by inner membrane. Tons of membrane. And these are phospholipid bilayers. So tons of phospholipid bilayers to allow for chemical reactions. Okay, very important. You will see, okay, here's a little kind of nugget for when we get to cellular respiration. You're going to see something very similar in the mitochondria. All right, the mitochondria has an outer membrane and it has an inner membrane. The structure is a little bit different, obviously, from the chloroplast because different reactions occur in the mitochondria versus the chloroplast. But what you're going to see is that both have an outer membrane and both have an inner membrane so that we can get more membrane for more reactions, thus more efficiency. Okay? Surface area to volume ratio is important all the time. All right, so let's kind of dive into this bad boy. Photosynthesis, we talked about this in class. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but this is just to kind of refresh your memory. So we have 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O, and for some reason, I left that off there, but we have light. Okay, we have our light energy, and then the carbon dioxide, the water, plus the light gives us C6H12O6 plus oxygen plus a little bit of heat here at the end because we're getting so much energy coming in from the sun. All right, so I'll take a second to see if it's getting a little bit jumpy. All right. So that's our overall reaction for photosynthesis. Okay, 6 carbon dioxide plus 6 water in the presence of sunlight gives us C6H12O6 plus oxygen plus heat. Okay. See if that helps a little bit. Okay, so photosynthesis is broken down into 2 parts, and here's where we're really going to start diving into the important information with this. Okay, photosynthesis is broken down into 2 parts. Right? The first part is what we call the light-dependent reactions of photosynthesis. Okay, the light-dependent reactions of photosynthesis occur across the inner membrane on what's called the thylakoids of the chloroplast. So here's our outer membrane, here's our inner membrane. These are called thylakoids, and that's where the light-dependent reactions take place. So these reactions, let's read this. These reactions start the process of photosynthesis by using energy from the sun or from light to create ultimately ATP, which is an energy molecule, and NADPH, which is an electron carrier. Okay? Energy from the excited electrons that are found within these reactions are used to later create sugar or glucose. Okay? So the whole idea with this, okay, the whole idea with the light-dependent reactions is to bring in water, bring in energy from the sun to create ATP, which is an energy molecule, NADPH, which is an electron carrier, and we'll see why that's important a little bit later on. And then the most beautiful byproduct, really maybe of any chemical reaction that naturally occurs on our planet, oxygen, comes as a result of the light-dependent reactions. Okay, so that's our first part of photosynthesis, and that these reactions are going to be able to happen as long as there's light available. So when the sun is out, a plant is doing photosynthesis, it's just cranking through these light-dependent reactions to create ATP and NADPH, which we'll see are going to be used later on. Okay? So the second part of photosynthesis is what we call the light-independent reactions, or the Calvin cycle. Okay? So these reactions come after the light-dependent reactions, and they use the energy and the stored electrons from the light-dependent reactions to make glucose. So let's see what this looks like. Okay? In our light-independent reactions, the whole point is to take in carbon dioxide, ATP, and NADPH to create sugar, right? We need that glucose. To create NADP+, which we'll see how all of this stuff works when we really dive into these reactions, and ADP plus P. Okay? So we use the materials that are created in the light-dependent reactions to drive the Calvin cycle. All right? So the whole point of the light-independent reactions, or the Calvin cycle, is to bring in carbon dioxide, bring in ATP, bring in NADPH to create glucose, and then recycle these materials back into the light-dependent reactions so that they can be remade and we can have more Calvin cycle. Okay? So we got our light-dependent. I'm going to go back just a little bit. So we have our light-dependent reactions, which are going to be occurring anytime there is sunlight available. Anytime there's light energy, plants using their chloroplasts are going to do the light-dependent reactions. Okay? The light-independent reactions depend on the light-dependent to create these 2 materials. So as long as this set of reactions can create ATP and NADPH, we can have we can have the light-independent reactions, which are going to create glucose. Okay? I don't see any questions just yet, so I'm going to go ahead and push on. All right? Light-dependent reactions, light-independent reactions. So what we're ultimately going to do after we do our little bit of introduction is we're going to dive into this, and we're going to dive into that. And that's where it gets really cool. That's where we really get to bring in chemistry and biology, biochemistry, and see how plants actually ultimately create sugar. Okay? That, my friends, is the good stuff. Okay, so let's keep going. So, the electromagnetic spectrum. So we know that plants use energy from the sun to drive the reactions to turn carbon dioxide and water into glucose and oxygen. Okay? So a quick little review on the electromagnetic spectrum, the light that's coming from the sun. You guys, I'm sure, know this from physics. All right? The light that comes from the sun is actually a spectrum. All right? So on the lower end of the spectrum, okay, the lower energy portion, we have our purples and our blues. Right smack dab in the middle, we have our greens and our yellows. And then on the higher end of the electromagnetic spectrum, okay, so I'm sorry, longer wavelength, lower energy, shorter wavelength, higher energy. So we have our higher energy colors on this side, we have our lower energy colors on this side, but up there we have our reds. Okay? So as that light comes in and hits the chloroplast, which we'll see here in just a second, something happens, and we know just by looking at green plants that something is happening. All right? The idea is that all of this light energy is being absorbed by the chloroplasts. All of this light energy is being absorbed by the chloroplasts. And this stuff right smack dab in the middle, the green light for most plants is being reflected. That's why we see green when we look at plants. The rest of these colors, the rest of this light energy is being absorbed and used by the plants, but the green is being reflected. Okay? So, as we know from sophomore biology, chloroplasts absorb all wavelengths of light except for green light. This light is reflected away from the chloroplast, thus causing most plants to appear green. Okay? How do we know? So, what type of evidence can we use to support the fact that plants do in fact reflect green light and absorb all other colors of light, other than just, hey, I can look at a plant and see that it's green, so I know that it's reflecting green light? What type of evidence can we actually provide to support that? So there's a wonderful experiment that we need to know for AP Biology that helps to provide evidence to support the fact that green light is in fact reflected while the rest of the wavelengths of light are absorbed. Okay? And there's ultimately two parts to it. Okay? So here's what we have. We got a light source. Pretend it's the sun. In this case, it's just an incandescent white light. But let's pretend that this is the sun. Okay? So the sun is going to send out all of the visible spectrum of light. So we got our purples and our blues. We have our greens and yellows and our reds and oranges up on the top. All right? We're going to send this through a prism so that it breaks up into the different wavelengths of light. And then we're going to send that visible spectrum through a slit, all right, in basically like a little membrane, a little structure that's going to only allow certain wavelengths of light through. Okay. In our test tube here, we're going to have a solution with chloroplasts suspended in it. Okay. So we're going to shine this green light on those chloroplasts. Any light that comes through the test tube, we are going to pick up by basically a tool that that shows what wavelengths of light are absorbed or being released by, in this case, the chloroplast. Okay, so the light goes into the test tube, it comes out, and what we notice is that when we check the reading on our tool, we see that green light is being reflected. Okay? So we can actually collect evidence to support that chloroplasts are not absorbing green light, they are reflecting it. Okay? So the opposite is, if we do the same thing, we have our light source, we shine it through a prism, but now we move the slit in our little membrane to allow blue light to pass, and we could do this with red light or orange or yellow or blue or purple or whatever, but in this case we're going to move it to allow blue light through. The blue light is going to hit our chloroplasts, and a very small amount of that blue light is going to pass through the chloroplast and get picked up by our absorption spectrometer. Okay, so what it shows is a very small amount of that light is passing through. So that shows us that the light is being absorbed by the chloroplasts. Okay, so again, you can do this with any color of light, and green light is going to be the only color that is not absorbed by the chloroplast. The reds, the oranges, the yellows, the blues, the purples, all of that light is going to be absorbed by the chloroplast, and it's going to show up on our absorption spectrometer. Okay, pretty cool, because not only do we want to know how it works, but we want to be able to gather some evidence and provide some evidence to support that. Okay, cool stuff. All right. So this is just another version of that. You may have seen this in sophomore biology. I try to show it every year. So this is, again, an absorption spectrum for the different colors of light. We also have some different types of pigments. Chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B are the most common pigments in chloroplasts. Okay? So what we can see is that those pigments are going to do a lot of absorbing at the blue and purple end. They do very little, if any, absorbing in the green and yellow. And then when we get back to the reds and the oranges, we're going to see that they absorb those colors. Okay? Carotenoids are what we call accessory pigments. So these are pigments that plants also have that help to absorb light energy. And what you can see with the carotenoids is that they're going to absorb at the blue and purple end, but they're actually going to reflect everything else, the greens, the yellows, the oranges, and the reds. So the idea is this: as we go from spring into summer into fall, chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B break down in the chloroplasts of plants. All right? So what happens to leaves, especially on the plants and trees that we have around here, what happens to those leaves? We start to see those accessory pigments absorbing and reflecting different colors of light. All right? So the leaves around us, they go from green and then they go into red and orange and yellow and ultimately brown as they're totally breaking down and falling off of the trees. Okay? So we have all of these different pigments that exist in the chloroplasts of plants that are going to allow them to absorb as much light energy as possible to drive the light-dependent and light-independent reactions of photosynthesis. Okay? Pretty cool stuff. Just trying to stay on top of this. I don't see any questions just yet, so we should be good there. Okay? So this is all of our background stuff. All right? I'm going to jump back just a little bit. Okay? We got our light-dependent reactions, right? Taking in light, taking in water, creating NADPH, ATP, and oxygen. Okay, these are going to exist on that inner chloroplast membrane. We have our light-independent reactions, where we're taking in the ATP and the NADPH that were made earlier. We're bringing in carbon dioxide to create sugar, glucose, and also recycle these materials back to the light-dependent reactions to allow everything to happen. All right? So, let's kind of move on a little bit. All right, so a molecule of chlorophyll. So we're now going to start diving into the light-dependent reactions. All right, so we're going to start looking at more detail. We're going to look at how these processes actually happen to allow a plant to take in energy from the sun, to take in water to create ATP, NADPH, and oxygen. So we're going to start here, okay? So within the chloroplasts of plants, on the inner membrane, we have these clusters of chlorophyll pigment molecules, okay? Chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B. We also have these carotenoids. Yeah, could you explain NADPH? I'm going to. So Megan asked a question. Could you explain NADPH? I'm going to here in just a moment. Okay. What we need to know right now about NADPH is that it is an electron carrier. So it's a molecule that picks up electrons from one place and transports them to another place so that they can be dropped off, and the energy from those electrons can be used to power something. Okay. We're going to see that here in just a moment. Okay, great question. Thank you for asking that. So NADPH is an electron carrier taking electrons from one place to another. Okay, so let's kind of hop back into this. We have our cluster of chlorophyll pigments. All right. Within those chlorophyll pigments, so this is the chemical structure of chlorophyll. Okay. Right smack dab in the middle of each pigment of chlorophyll is an atom of magnesium. All right? It's surrounded by nitrogens and carbons and hydrogens and oxygens, which is important to the structure of chlorophyll, but the most important thing for us is this atom of magnesium. Okay? Why is that important? Because, and I know that this is going to be a little bit difficult to see. Okay? The reason that it is important is because magnesium, which is right down here, has two valence electrons. So it has two outer shell electrons. All right? So what we can ultimately do, what can ultimately happen in these chemical reactions is that these electrons can become so excited that they're going to jump to another kind of electron state or another level of excitedness. They're going to become excited and they're going to leave this outermost shell of magnesium. Okay? Once those electrons leave, you're going to be able to do something with that energy. Okay? So right smack dab in the middle of a molecule of chlorophyll, we have an atom of magnesium which has two valence electrons that are going to play a super duper important part in the way that these processes work. Okay? So, let me see. So I know that I'm moving a little bit quickly. We had the question about NADPH, but we don't have anything else so far. So here's ultimately what's going to happen. All right. So here we have these pigments, okay, of chlorophyll. All right. And we have the one super important, what we call the reaction center, or the primary electron acceptor, which we'll see here in a second. Within this cluster of chlorophyll molecules, that's going to have that magnesium atom on there that's going to do something with those electrons. So as all of that sun energy, all of that energy from the sun is absorbed by all of these chlorophyll molecules, what we're ultimately going to see is all of those electrons are going to become really excited and they're going to start spinning, and they're actually going to move through a series of proteins to go from one place to another. Okay? So really what's happening, so hear me out, what is happening during the light-dependent reactions is that plants are just hanging out, they're using their chloroplasts, they're using these chlorophyll pigments to absorb as much light energy as possible so that they can excite electrons, so that those electrons will then jump off of these atoms of magnesium, and the energy from those electrons can be harnessed and used to do something. Okay? So we have these clusters of pigment molecules that are going to allow this to happen. All right, so here, I'm trying to show, so here's kind of what this looks like. And here in a moment, we're going to take a second to look at this in a little bit more detail. All right, I know it's kind of hard to see. Let me see if I can move you a little bit closer. Okay, so here's what we got. There we go. Okay, so these are the reactions that are going to exist for the light-dependent reactions. Okay, so what I want to draw your attention to, come down here. Okay, so here are our first collection of pigment molecules. Okay, here's our light energy. Our light energy is going to be absorbed by all of these pigment molecules, and it's going to excite the 2 electrons on magnesium. Okay? Those electrons from magnesium are going to become so excited that they're going to leave the magnesium atom and they're going to move to what's called the primary electron acceptor. It is just a protein in the membrane, the inner membrane of the chloroplast, that is going to change shape, accept those electrons, and allow something to happen. Okay? Because those electrons are incredibly excited, they're going to continue to move through another series of proteins. As those proteins change shape, the electrons are going to move down the membrane. And I'll show you a better picture of this here in just a second. Okay? Those electrons are going to get picked up by a second cluster of pigment molecules. All right? So that magnesium is going to accept those electrons. They're going to be re-excited by the sun, by light energy, okay? And those electrons are then going to be re-excited. They're going to go to another primary electron acceptor. They're going to move through a series of proteins, and they're going to end up in what is called NADP plus reductase. All right, and again, we'll look at these in a little bit more detail here in a second, okay? NADP plus reductase is going to turn NADP plus and 2 hydrogens into NADPH. All right? And this is our electron carrier. So NADPH is very simply just a molecule that accepts electrons and takes it somewhere else. Okay? So let's go back to the beginning really quickly, and then we'll jump to our next slide. All right? Actually, let's go to this slide really quickly so you can see what this looks like. All right? So this is the chloroplast. All right? So here's our picture up here. We have our outer membrane on our chloroplast, and then in here we have all of these inner membranes. Okay? This is the zoomed in version of the inner membrane. All right? Try to get that so that you can see exactly what's going on. So here's our first cluster of chlorophyll pigments that are going to accept energy from the sun. Okay? They're going to excite our electrons on our magnesium, and our magnesium is going to move through a series of proteins until it winds up in our second cluster of chlorophyll pigments. Right? This second cluster is going to accept energy from the light to re-excite those electrons. Right? And then it's going to move through another series of proteins until it reaches NADP plus reductase, which is going to turn NADP plus and 2 hydrogens into NADPH plus a hydrogen, and that's going to go to the Calvin cycle. Okay? Along the way, those electrons are going to power a protein pump, which is called the cytochrome complex, which is going to pump hydrogens into what's called the thylakoid space. Those hydrogens are then going to move via diffusion through what's called ATP synthase to create ATP. Okay? ATP is going to go to the Calvin cycle, and NADPH is also going to go to the Calvin cycle. All right? So remember, the whole point, what are we looking at with time? 8:52. Bear with me for just a second. I lost my. So the whole point, and I know that there's a lot going on here and it can be a little bit difficult, but the whole point of this process of photosynthesis, the light-dependent reactions, is to take an energy from the sun, to create NADPH and ATP, which can then be sent to the Calvin cycle, right? Now there becomes an issue. There is an issue with this, okay? The issue is, checking to see if we have any other questions, okay? The issue is, if the electrons leave a magnesium that's located here, and they move through the rest of these accessory proteins, and they wind up in NADPH, and they're taken to the Calvin cycle, how do we replenish the electrons? How do we replenish the electrons so that we can send them again? That's where water comes in, okay? Every time that two electrons leave this first cluster of pigments and move through to NADPH, a molecule of water is split. The electrons from that molecule of water are used to replenish the magnesium, and we create hydrogen plus half of an oxygen molecule. Okay? So here's the really cool thing. I'm going to put you guys back down for a second. Okay? So you don't get like dizzy from me holding you up there. Okay? So here is the really cool thing. The oxygen that we breathe, okay, as you sit where you are, the oxygen that you breathe ultimately comes from water. So as plants take in water, the reason, well, one of the reasons that they're taking in water is so that they can replenish the electrons for the light-dependent reactions so that we can make NADPH. Okay? As you break those molecules of water, you get the electrons and you make oxygen, and organisms breathe in the oxygen. Okay? So again, I know that there's a lot going on in this slide. Okay? What we ultimately need to know. Okay? So here's kind of our wrap up for what we need to know. I'm going to jump back a little bit. Okay? Here's what we need to know. We have two sets of reactions that occur in photosynthesis. Okay? The first set of reactions is what we call the light-dependent reactions. Okay? These reactions occur on the inner membrane of the chloroplast, and the reactions allow for water and light to be transformed into ATP, NADPH, and oxygen. Right? So the whole point of plants taking in light and taking in water is to create ATP, NADPH, and the byproduct, which is oxygen. Why? Why do they need to make those materials? So that the ATP and the NADPH can be used to ultimately make sugar. Okay? Where does that occur? Jump ahead a little bit. It occurs on the membrane, the inner membrane of the chloroplast. Whoops. Okay? So it occurs on the inner membrane of the chloroplast. All of these, so this is an integral protein, okay? The structure of that integral protein allows it to have the chlorophyll pigments, right? It also allows it to break down a molecule of water, okay? This is a peripheral protein, this is a peripheral protein, this is a peripheral protein. So these are just kind of in-betweens. These are enzymes or peripheral proteins that are going to allow for the movement of electrons down this process. Okay, here's another integral protein, right? This is actually a proton pump, so it pumps hydrogens. Okay, here's an integral protein. This is another protein that has those chlorophyll pigment molecules that are going to absorb energy from the sun. And then lastly, we have an integral protein that is this NADP plus reductase. Okay, So what that's going to do is turn NADP plus and 2 hydrogens into NADPH and a hydrogen. Okay? And then the last thing that we have down here is our ATP synthase. This is also an integral protein. Okay? Basically what it is it's a protein that each time a hydrogen passes through this protein, it turns ADP plus a phosphorus into an ATP molecule. Okay? And then that ATP molecule can be sent to the Calvin cycle. All right? So, what we need to do, okay, and here's what I'm going to have you guys do as we kind of wrap this up. What are we looking at? How much time are we looking at here? Let me jump back. Oh, I got a question. So, does the Calvin cycle also occur on the inner membrane of the chloroplast? Great question. Okay, the Calvin cycle does not occur on the inner membrane of the chloroplast. The Calvin cycle is actually going to occur. Okay, so Maggie asks, does the Calvin cycle also occur on the inner membrane of the chloroplast? It does not. So the Calvin cycle is going to occur in what's called the stroma. So you see all this open blue space kind of in between all of these inner membranes. The Calvin cycle is really just a series of enzymes and a series of reactions that are going to occur in all of this open space within the chloroplast that's called the stroma. Okay? The reason, this is an awesome question, okay? The reason that the light-dependent reactions have to occur on that inner membrane is because these reactions require the chlorophyll pigments, which are part of those integral proteins. They require those peripheral accessory proteins to move the electrons. They also, the light-dependent reactions, also require NADP plus reductase and that ATP synthase. So these reactions need all of those membrane proteins, those different types of membrane proteins. These reactions do not. Okay? So again, light-dependent reactions, that's an awesome, awesome question. Light-dependent reactions, they occur on the inner membrane of the chloroplast. Light-independent reactions, the Calvin cycle, which we're going to look at on Thursday, the Calvin cycle, those occur in what's called the stroma, right? And it's the combination of those two sets of chemical reactions, the light-dependent reactions and the light-independent reactions, that are going to allow for the production of glucose, okay? I know there's a lot there, so kind of what my plan is to allow you guys to kind of digest this a little bit. I haven't decided how I'm going to do questions or anything like that because I'm not with you, so I can't walk around and draw pictures and have you do all of that stuff. So it's a little bit of a tough concept to kind of pass on. So we're going to use videos. We're going to use these live lectures. We're going to use these experiences to try to help us cover this information. But I wanted to at least give you the opportunity to see me talking about it, to see it up on the board and have me show it to you. Okay? So I'll just kind of hang. I'll let you kind of digest it a little bit and see if you have any further questions. And then we'll probably call it quits for today. Let you guys again kind of digest it, and we'll come back together on Microsoft Teams on Thursday and talk a little bit about this before we move on. Okay? Really, we want to make sure that we're good with the light-dependent reactions. So that will kind of be our focus for this week. Next week will be all about the light-independent reactions, or the Calvin cycle. And that's going to kind of set us up for our last test, our semester exam, so that we'll be ready to rock and roll there. Okay? So I don't see any other questions popping up here on YouTube. So what I want you guys to do is this. Okay? Take a little bit of time before the end of the period and just kind of go back through the PowerPoint and make sure that if you have any questions that you jot those down. When we meet on Thursday via Teams, I will share my screen and we'll be able to kind of use that as like a little bit of, it's not review because we're still learning it, but we'll use it as an opportunity to talk a little bit more about this. I can answer some of your questions and we can go from there. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you to you guys for joining me. All right. Pay attention to Thursday, 8:15, I think is what I have on the agenda. We're going to meet via Microsoft Teams for kind of a live class meeting, and you guys will have the opportunity to ask some of those questions. Okay? I didn't really get to see you, but thank you to you guys for signing on and following along with me, and I will see you guys on Thursday. All right? Have a wonderful day. Hopefully that helped a little bit and didn't create too much confusion. But we'll make some sense of it a little bit more on Thursday. All right, see you guys soon. Take care. Oh. All right, so one last thing. Ethan, you weren't here at the very beginning. I'm not going to do the discussion in Schoology. I just decided that with the amount of time that we needed for the lecture, I just wanted you guys to kind of follow along with the lecture, and then we'll kind of do the discussion when we come back on Thursday for the live Teams meeting. All right, so this is it for today. Hopefully you enjoyed. I will see you guys again on Thursday. All right, do your thing. Let me know if you have any questions. Schoology, Microsoft Teams, shoot me a message and we'll try to talk about it. All right, have a good day.